bon dia, the limits of my language abilities. Good morning. I didn't understand everything but some that Amado said, but I assume it's all good like post-truths. It's a pleasure to be with you today at the 7th Catalan Conference of Sociology and the 5th Catalan Conference of Young Sociologists. I apologize for speaking in English, but it is a part of the colonial legacy. I will try and speak slowly, as I have been told by Amado, and please let me know if I talk too fast. I want to thank the Catalan Association of Sociology. I want to thank the organizers of this conference and the local organizing committee. I want to especially thank Professor Amado Aljon, President of the local organizing committee, Professor Fidel Molina, President of the Catalan Association of Sociology, and also thank the University Rovira e Virgili. I'm also pleased to speak on this panel with Michel Viviorca, past president of ISA. And I want to, on behalf of ISA, the International Sociological Association, also say welcome. The conference title chosen, The Post-Truth and the Lack of Reflection, a New Reality of the 21st Century, is particularly timely and pertinent. It is a time when we sociologists need to examine, reflect upon, understand, and address the social reality of the post-truth world as social scientists, but also as members of civil society. Showing a great feel for the pulse of today's world, the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year 2016 is post-truth, defining the term as, I quote, relating to or circumstances where objective truths are less influential in shaping public opinions than appeals to emotion and belief and personal belief, unquote. Serbian-American playwright Steve Tesic, in an article in The Nation in 1992, was the first to use the word to describe the Watergate syndrome, the Iran-Contra scandal, and the Persian Gulf War, and the lack of interest of the public in really wanting to know the truth. In his essay, he states that, and I quote, "We are rapidly becoming prototypes of a people that totalitarian monsters can only drool upon in their dreams. All the dictators until now have had to work hard at suppressing the truth. We, by our actions, are saying that is no longer necessary, that we have acquired a spiritual mechanism that can denude truth of any significance. In a very fundamental way, we, as free people, have freely decided that we want to, that we want to live in some post-world truth, unquote." And he writes this in A Government of Lies in The Nation in 1992. 25 years later, post-truth encapsulates the Orwellian world of today, where beliefs trump truth, where the lines between reality and fiction have become blurred, where perceptions are playing havoc with facts. In fact, in the Orwellian Animal Farm, Squealer, the propagandist porker, can turn black into white. This has added new terms to the English lexicon, such as alternative facts and truthful hyperbole. So undeniably loose with truth have the public debates become that the cover page and lead article of the April 3rd, 2016 17 issue of Time magazine was devoted to asking the loaded metaphysical question, is truth dead? Orwell's dark forebodings about a totalitarian state, which uses doublethink and language to control the minds and actions of its people, seem eerily near at hand today, as diversion, distortion, exaggeration, and plain falsehoods and misinformation dominate cyberspace, social media, media sources, and influence thinking. In our polarized post-truth, the certitudes of previously dominant liberal political and moral order are now in question. In large parts of the world, there has been a definite, in many ways, an unstoppable progression of right-wing thinking and a deep distrust of the fundamental liberal values of tolerance, inclusion, and human rights. We are witnessing the double standards and hypocrisies of both right-wing and the liberal left constituencies. It would appear in this current period that we are witnessing the social issue or problem where truth is no longer considered a virtue or a societal value that is desirable. In this post-truth time, facts appear to no longer matter. Those who seem to care about truths or facts, particularly in politics, seem to be out of sync with the big players in the political arena. In the case of the US elections, fact-checking only appeared to decrease or diminish the role of facts. And you can read Randall Amster and also an article by Politico Susan B. Glasser covering politics. As a consequence, existing systems are in turmoil, institutions are in disarray, and democracy itself is in crisis or being challenged. A telling symptom of the extinguishing of hope and optimism is the populist anger that led to Brexit and the diminishing of all that the European Union stands for. 2017 heralds the prospect of many more regimes responding positively to extremist appeals and using misinformation and fake news to bolster their position. In many parts of the world, we are witnessing a growing culture of fear that is shaping the public and the electoral landscape and society in general. The reality of economic and social setbacks have created a sense of loss and fear of a bleak future for some segments of society. Their fears and frustrations, sense of disenchantment and rage can be manipulated and twisted by politicians for their own political interests. And we're seeing this time and again in these last few years. What matters not is not the truth, but the ability of politicians to appeal to people's emotions and align their statements to correspond with people's anxieties. And we saw this, right, in the problems of post-truth politics, which is not unique to the presidential elections or even to America. We see this in different parts of the world. In fact, during the June referendum on Britain's membership of the European Union, Faisal Islam, political editor of Sky News, who had interviewed the Minister of Justice in the Conservative government, Michael Gove, Islam listed a number of countries, institutions, and individuals, warning that Brexit could damage the British economy. And this included India, China, the US, the Bank of England, the International Monetary Fund, the Confederation of British Unions. And what was Gove's response? I quote, "I think the people in this country have had enough of experts. From the organizations with acronyms saying that they know what is best." And this kind of remark, as Helen Lewis points out, epitomized a campaign by widespread misinformation and sometimes outright lies. Significantly, the underprivileged, who should have been the natural allies of the left liberal constituency, are increasingly supporting right-wing and xenophobic forces. The post-truth society is not about evidence. It is about knowing what is the substance or what is it that will appeal to the emotions despite the lack of veracity. Growing inequality and resultant widespread frustration and anger have engendered deeply polarized societies that have heightened forms of racism, xenophobia, ethnocentrism, religious fundamentalism, and the politics of exclusion. Instead of targeting the real perpetrators of an unequal system, the resentment and frustration have turned into a frontal attack on multiculturalism, secularism, LGBTQ rights, and a surge of narrow, narcissistic nationalism. A frightening aspect of the surreal world is that the purveyors of fabricated claims and deliberative inventive deceit are able to convince their legion of supporters of their point of view, however extreme and false, through effective use of the media and more particularly of social media. Evan Osnos of The New Yorker notes that the alternative conservative media has, and I quote, acculturated readers to comfort with conspiracy theory and unreality, unquote. He cites in a 2015 CNN poll that found 28% of Republicans did not believe Barack Obama was born in the US, even though the president published his long-form birth certificate in 2011. It was an indicator of the degree to which people have become alienated from plain, indisputable facts, says Osnos. Using Goebbelsian methods of stating and repeating dubious claims and prejudices by politicians and in the echo chambers of social media that circulate falsehoods and prejudice exponentially, the manipulators of truth are having a field day. And I say this in terms of Goebbels because you have this quote, "It would not be impossible to prove with sufficient repetition and a psychological understanding of the people concerned that a square is in fact a circle," unquote. They are mere words, and words can be molded until they clothe ideas and disguise. And this is Goebbels' words, right? And he was, of course, Hitler's minister of propaganda. So we see this kind of mode again appearing. I dare say that the conventional media has been overwhelmed by Twitter and troll factories, which have become the overpowering, dominant influence for news, views, and commentary on the world around us. For example, in the final 3 months of the presidential campaign in the US, we found that 20 top performing fake election news stories led to more engagement on Facebook than the top stories for major news outlets such as the New York Times. And this, BuzzFeed had this. And just to provide the kind of data, so you had mainstream news in February, which had about 12.4 million viewers, to the 2.9 million who were listening to fake news. Then, by May to July, you had 9.5 million listening to the mainstream news and 3.2 million in listening to so-called fake news. However, from August to November 2008, the main news had dropped to 7.4 million, while the fake news viewers were 8.7 million. Clearly shifts in who's listening and who's controlling the media. Now, this might sound terribly alarmist, but the symptoms of the New World disorder is most definitely a cause of concern. The world needs to recover its humanity, or at least strive for the lofty ideals of how humanity should aspire to be. How does the sociologist respond to this dystopia? How do sociologists face this profound challenge? How do we address issues that stem from fake news and widespread misinformation? How do we respond to the political and social landscapes where the public, segments of civil society, have its own filters and live in their own preferred bubble of so-called news or reality, where traditional news outlets are no longer trusted by the public and the sociologists not always at the forefront or taken seriously? Well, I would say, and this is only a part of my view, that sociologists need to go public. We need to share our sociological analysis. As a sociologist, I see my role to analyze and explain the social human world we live in, but also to use our sociological research not just to problematize, but for solutions and directions about how we can create a more humane future for all of us. I have at various fora advocated the critical need for sociologists to engage proactively in addressing in real time the problems of our contentious world. After all, sociology's core purpose, to some degree, is to examine, understand, and make sense of the social world we live in, and thereby, in my belief, contribute to making it a better place. And sociologists have done this over the years, engage in social transformation. I have gone so far as to state that confronted by political and social upheavals of our time, sociological silence is tantamount to being complicit in injustice. We have, as sociologists, a social responsibility to share our knowledge and insights with society's main stakeholders, that is civil society. And as president of ISA, I've urged members to actively participate in public debates and interactions on contemporary issues across the media. The very tools that are being misused for airing hate, fake news, need to be harnessed by sociologists in providing research and in the services of society. I've even ventured to suggest that ISA studies and analysis on major crises of today should be transmitted to those in pivotal positions in decision-making across the world, even if it is like throwing straws against the wind. As sociologists and educators, our main terrain of engagement is the educational institution, a very important public, where we collaborate with our students in the shared pursuit of learning. The rector mentioned that a little earlier. I have a slightly different take on it. In the context of what's happening in the world today, I wish to invoke the great sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois' robust faith in education and his plea for an education that produces people with the trained ability of, I quote, joining their hands to other hands and to giving the squabble of race a decent and dignified peace. His message is more relevant than ever today. It is undeniable that neoliberalism, marketization, and commodification of education have posed new challenges to higher education. There is a growing pressure to run universities like large-scale business enterprises with profit as the primary focus. Education is increasingly defined in narrow ways shaped by perceptions that focus on short-term material benefits. Such a constricted, illiberal, and commercial approach to education is detrimental to the development of sociology and the social sciences that are so critical for comprehending and addressing the social problems that confront our societies. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't have to see that our sociologists and students get a job, but also understanding how that should not be defined in very narrow ways. We need to guard against students being transformed into customers who have to be satisfied and entertained, including in the world of post-truths, and have them instead as collaborators in the pursuit for knowledge. I fear that the current ethos, where education is treated as a commercial proposition and the teacher-student relationship is one of arid mercantilism, poses a serious threat to the world of values and facts. my lifetime experience as a sociologist and teacher is that sociology, in fact, is an important component of education, an education that does not sensitize one to problems of social exclusion, stigmatization, racial and gender discrimination, insularity and provincialism, and address the global forces of change, cannot count for much. After all, in a market-driven world where everything is judged in terms of monetary worth, the oasis of hope is the university, which is a place which resides or should reside the deepest and most sensitive consciousness of the community, where human sensibility is refined and sharpened and post-truths questioned. I spend this little time talking about the university because we have the young sociologists here and junior sociologists, and they are a part of the future. So the onus is clearly on us as sociologists, teachers, and our students on the imperative of tempering the competitive pursuit of personal advantage, where a positive desire to work for an equitable social order, and to separate misinformation, lies, and fake news. In this endeavor, perhaps the most important challenge is to contour the hierarchies of knowledge production that perpetuate inequalities. We as sociologists need to examine and explain the causes, contexts, constructions, contradictions, and contestations around the major issues in our societies. As a sociologist, researchers and teachers actively involved in social justice issues relating to gender, class, ethnicity, and human rights, I find that the astounding and overpowering influence of the social media worries me deeply. While it is undeniable that the beguiling tools of social media have revolutionized communication and universalized access to information, knowledge, and entertainment, how does one choose from this mind-boggling melange of the good, the bad, and the trite? Really the trite. We all need to be aware that social media is arguably the biggest thief of time, which is unsurprising as it has become a dominant instrument of political and cultural power. For sociologists and teachers, equally worrying is that with any kind of information so easily Googleable, and we all know we all use Google quite a lot, the precious and intellectually satisfying skill of imbibing knowledge through sifting, reflecting, verifying, debating ideas, themes, and texts is seriously threatened. Moreover, the information overload has muffled and marginalized the serious studies and views of those engaging in documenting the realities and problems of ordinary citizens. The print era which held sway and influenced mass behavior through the power of ideas is receding fast. And the reality is, whether we like it or not, that we live in a different time and in a different world, and in a world of post-truths. In the post-truth world, as Will Davis notes, how can we be speaking of facts when they no longer provide us with the reality that we can all agree upon? The problem is that the experts and agencies involved in producing facts have multiplied, and many are now for hire. If you really want to find an expert willing to endorse a fact and have sufficient money or political clout behind you, you probably can, says Will Davis. And it's the truth. If you look at the data, you can get all kinds of people and outsource the creation of facts through social media. So in this post-truth, we do have to look at this. For us as sociologists engaged in research and seeking sources of funding, this is also an important cautionary note. And I mention this to all of you because I've been traveling to different parts of the world, and I find this is a similar issue that has come up about funding. Research funding is a vital part that enables us to engage in research and activism that can help us make a difference. The issue of research the issue of funding for researchers addressing social justice, or in fact any part of the world, is a complex one. For researchers, funding sources vary from state grants, corporations providing funding, grants from foundations, university grants, and collaborative grants with NGOs. A part of the transformational politic entails devoting attention to reconciling the demands of funding sources and our own research agendas. The questions that researchers and activists and community partners have to ask is, how do we acquire funding without compromising our research collaborations with stakeholders? We have to be careful how we engage in this funding process and how our own research does not become just a product of what the powers and the providers of funding want from us through the manipulation of data. So it's imperative that we consider how we ourselves engage and disseminate research in this post-world truth, and whether, through the manipulation of data, whether we ourselves as researchers are involved in a kind of post-truth. Despite its potential, I want to take this moment to strongly advocate for this, because I think funding has become one of the ways in which data collection also takes place, and how we ourselves are reflective, but also critical in the way we gather that data and disseminate that information. Despite its immense potential for public good, one cannot help observing that the anonymity of the social media is being used with devastating effect as a socially divisive weapon to fan prejudice, mischief, and hate. The power to broadcast every stray thought or impulse without bothering about accuracy or correctness, and then to find many like-minded fellow travelers to create an alliance that bypasses the culturally constructed ideas of what is legitimate, what is truth, what is fact, and what is not, is highly problematic. We are all witness to the critical role played by the social media in the politics of nations. Without the intervention, and without our intervention as sociologists, the situation may worsen, and we will increasingly see the normalization of post-truths. As I mentioned earlier, in this post-truth world, the sociologists listening, questioning, dialoguing, and debating, communicating and engaging with the broader publics become even more imperative. It allows us an important avenue to share our research with a broader audience than academics. It helps us highlight the issues we want to raise and frame the context, explaining the causes and contradictions, but also offering solutions. This can be the kind of research dissemination that we can engage by challenging myths, providing valuable data, informing on laws, mobilizing for change, all showing that our research as sociologists and social scientists and our practices matter. It can offer facts in ways that can help alleviate fears and challenge unrealistic plans, such as building huge walls, deporting millions of people, labeling communities as terrorists, and thereby help in some way to counter the damage of misinformation or post-truths. I find as I watch TV, I'm amazed. I live in the US and I watch TV, and it's interesting how there are only people who will only watch Fox News or only watch MSNBC, and there are these shouting matches, and you're trying to understand what's going on. But what is equally problematic is that even when you show the evidence otherwise, they're saying, yeah, but we trust Trump. Well, the people who are doing all these terrorist acts are not from these certain countries, but are homegrown. Yes, but we have to stop the immigrants. So this whole idea of misinformation, but also wanting to align with what sounds good to those people and feeds into their fears, right? And aligns with it. And how do we as sociologists then give the data, not just as dry facts, because that doesn't align with their emotions, but how do we disseminate that information so that we also have a stake in the public? We also have, so we have to help in some way damage, control, not control, or I would say counter some of the misinformation or post-truths. But we need to be sure we're not just making random statements, but also providing some of the data and supportive material so that we can be taken seriously. We also have to use our sociological research, and this is important, to challenge the very institutions that promote and facilitate fake news and misinformation and hold them accountable. So it's not just blaming the individuals, but how do we hold the institutions that are providing these accountable? So for example, now the March on Science, right? Where, you have global warming. There's no global warming. And all these kind of bits of information where social science is being delegitimized. How do we as social scientists get into this and talk about the human right to science, to social science? While there may be some degree of deliberate political exclusion of some of us due to the perception that sociologists tend to be holding more radical views and that we're far off left and, we should be kind of dismissed. We have to be careful about that too. It is time that we, as sociologists who engage in comprehensive understanding of our human world, who analyze institutions, structures, group behavior, actions, and happenings from the standpoint of their consequences for civil society, show that we can not just problematize, but we can offer solutions to a range of critical concerns. That we can use our sociology and counter misinformation, and that we, as sociologists and social scientists, can actively participate in vital public arenas. It reinforces the value of disseminating our research beyond academia to increase public awareness of social problems and thereby, like many sociologists before us, create avenues for social transformation and social change. Each generation has had its share of problems, and post-truth is not something new. Truths have always been, or mistruths have always been countered. But this is our time as sociologists to address the use of technology and the kinds of mistruth and misinformation that is happening today, creating for increased xenophobia, for narcissistic nationalism, for issues that alleviate gender rights. It is now, for those of us who study the discipline of sociology, who are sociologists, anthropologists, social scientists, historians, political scientists, and scientists, to come together to care for a common good, to harness this very potent tool of the media and social media, but to harness it for the benefit and the common good of society. And this, in my view, constitutes one of the greatest challenges in the post-truth world. That is, sociology's ability to use our theory, our research, our action to engage, to produce knowledge, to disseminate, and to communicate in more effective ways to build a more truthful society. And that itself is questionable. Gracias. Thank you.